Hello, and welcome to day 11 of the Ability event. My name is Joseph Jones, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here today. Today's Lunch and Learn about disability policy will be one that's going to discuss Minnesota disability policy and with Minnesota disability political leaders. So on today's panel, we have former Senator Dave Durenberger, former Senator Jim Abeler, and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar as our special introduction to talk about disability policy that is currently out there and what is being done in Minnesota and what other places can do in order to impact the lives of those with disabilities living in Minnesota. I hope you'll enjoy today's presentation, and I hope you'll be able to join us for future presentations and programs as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and this Ability event that is taking us through several weeks of programs and events, one each day, where we can all connect and talk about disability policy and advancing the rights of people with disabilities in our country and around the world. Have a great day.
Thank you for inviting me to join you today to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'd like to thank our great host, St. Cloud State University. I wish I could visit now. I love going to St. Cloud State, and maybe I can in the fall. We'll do some kind of outdoor event. Well, St. Cloud State first established the Ability event in 2014. And I'd also like to thank President Robin Wacker, Steve Anderson, founder of the Ability event, and of course all of the students who led and coordinated this 30-day event celebrating 30 years of the ADA. I also want to thank my friend and former colleague in the Senate, Tom Harkin. The ADA was a landmark achievement for the senator from Iowa that wouldn't have been possible without his hard work to get it passed and signed into law. I wasn't there to see it, but in 1990, Tom gave a speech without saying one word. He was the first one to ever deliver a U.S. Senate speech from the floor entirely in sign language, which he learned from years of speaking to his brother Frank, who was deaf. Tom successfully urged the Senate to pass one of the great civil rights laws of the 20th century. He truly is the father of the ADA and a man who helped give a voice to those who are not often heard. We know he stood in the great footsteps of people like Hubert Humphrey, who was such an early advocate for people with disabilities, carried on by the work of Paul Wellstone, who we miss so much, who is Tom's best friend in the Senate, who also cared so much about this issue. For me, as your senator, this is personal. When my daughter was born, she couldn't swallow for nearly 2 years. The doctors didn't know why. She was fed with a feeding tube. And for us, it ended up being a temporary situation, albeit a hard one, with a lot of doctor's visits and hospital stays. But those 2 years, they were a gift. They gave me a perspective about what families who work to support a loved one with a disability go through every day, what heroes they are, how much they love their kids and their family members. Out of that experience, even though she ended up not having a permanent disability, it motivated me to serve on the board of the Pacer Center, as you know, a local nonprofit that's dedicated to helping children and young adults with disabilities. And I took this issue on in the Senate, worked on the ABLE Act to make sure that people who have family members with disabilities are able to appropriately save for them, continuing to expand on that work and the funding and IDEA and everything we need to do. I have met some of the most compassionate and resilient people through this work. We've spoke about the challenge that our families confront, how our kids do in the classroom, teenage angst, all of that fun stuff. And we've also been able to discuss the unique challenges that come with being a caregiver, especially during this pandemic. The resilience and strength of the people I've met that work in this area has given me so much respect for everyone who cares for people with disabilities. Whether they're parents, whether they're teachers, whether they're healthcare workers, whether they're friends, whether they're brothers or sisters. That's why I work to build on the success of the ADA with the ABLE Act As you know, it was established to provide new tax advantage savings accounts which allow people with disabilities and their families to save for their future and help cover important expenses like education, transportation, and housing. I've always believed that access and inclusion are basic human rights. The ADA and the ABLE Act are helping, but it's not enough. That's why I've supported ABLE 2.0, that will build on the progress we've made and will continue expanding opportunities to people with disabilities. And today, as we deal with the coronavirus pandemic, it's been more important than ever to ensure that our most vulnerable populations with pre-existing conditions who are most at risk get the help that they need. Like all of you, I'm committed to doing just that. In fact, I'm here in Washington right now as we work so hard to make sure that that next bill actually helps people with their health care, helps people with the help they need with nutrition, helps people so they can stay in their homes and with child care. To paraphrase Minnesota's own happy warrior, Hubert Humphrey, the moral test of a government isn't just how it treats the young, the healthy, and the able-bodied. It's how it treats the sick, the elderly, and people with disabilities, those in need of a little extra support. It can happen to anyone, to any family. That may be the moral test of a government, but I believe it is also the moral test of a people and of a community. So thank you for all you're doing. Please keep up the good work.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be able to introduce all of our senators we have on today. Senator John Hoffman, Senator Jim Abeler, and former Senator David Durenberger. My name is Avery Cook. I'm going to be your student facilitator for the day. I am a first-year RCE grad student. I am a white female with short purple hair with glasses. My pronouns are she, her, and I would love to get started with the panel today. So I know that our senators, some of them are muted, so if they can turn their screens on, we can get started. My first question is for Senator David Durenberger, former Senator David Durenberger. So I have all my questions right here, so I'm ready, so I'm not trying to look away. As one of the Republican authors of the ADA, can you tell us how you and other legislators like Senator Bob Dole worked effectively with Democrats to pass the first civil rights legislation for people with disabilities?
David, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, let's see if we can fix that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I think I got the question, which is how did we operate? How did we get the ADA passed? The fact of the matter is that in those days, it was how we did our jobs. It's how Republicans and Democrats worked together in order to get those legislative remedies for the health and other related problems that we sustained. We did it because on both sides of the aisle, we had the same kind of experiences that Tom Harkin had with his son. On both sides of the aisle, we had committees of jurisdiction in which some of us, in my case, I started way back in the early 80s working on equity issues and on disability issues. So I did that in 1985 with the equal access to polling places in America. So something simple, logical, you'd say, was make sure that if you're in a wheelchair, want to vote in a wheelchair, you can actually get inside the polling place. So we started with the simple things like that. And then in my case, with the help of a marvelous human being who's still our guide in Minnesota, Colleen Wick, I worked my way up to a position where I was asked to be by Bob Dole to be the Republican senator who would best represent our cause for people with disabilities. And so it was Tom and I who worked the bill through the Health Education Labor Committee, took it to the floor, and passed it on the floor. And you've already heard Amy tell the story about his his famous speech. But the bottom line is, that's how we did business in those days. That's how we did health policy reform. That's how we did environmental reform. We did the Affordable Care Act. We did the Americans with Disabilities Act. In addition to the Americans with Disabilities Act, we did the Clean Air Act, which is gradually being taken apart since then. So it's what you pay us to do, and I think it's what these two state senators from Minnesota will tell you is part of the challenge today and the political challenge that all of us face. But in causes like the ones we take up here, there should be no politics, and it's certainly not partisan politics.
Yeah, no, I get that. So the next question we have, also for former Senator Durenberger, is what advice do you have for our current Minnesota senators in working together to pass bipartisan legislation that would enhance the lives of people with disabilities?
Well, thanks for asking that question, because one of my sidelines now that I'm getting up in age, i.e., and getting ready for a new hip, for example, that sort of stuff, and getting ready to celebrate my 86th birthday, I've gotten involved with the Lincoln Project. And so one of my jobs, besides being critical of President Trump, is calling former Republican senators, the people that I served with. And I think I've now talked to at least 12 of them. And with only the exception of my colleague, Rudy Boschwitz, who's still busy raising money for Republican senators and so forth, and just didn't want to take a position, every single one of these former Republican senators said, number one, I'll help you get rid of the current president. Number two, I will do what I can to make it possible for people to again believe in their political party, and that their party is something other than a contrast with some other party and so forth. And the third thing that all of us agreed on was that the place to get things done, you're going to hear from next. The place to get things done now is at the state and at the state level, and for many of the things that we have to do at the local level. So whether it's what Jim does or John does in the state Senate, or what we can do with mayors and members of city councils and so forth in communities all over Minnesota, this isn't just a Washington thing anymore. This is something that we can all play a role in.
Yeah, we definitely do want an administration that will work with people with disabilities and will be there to support them. So our next question is for all of our senators. We did recently have Senator Tom Harkin with us for the Ability event, as we've mentioned before. And if he was able to be in Congress today, what he mentioned was that he would be advocating for amendments to the ADA that include more protection to PCA services. We have also heard from some of our other speakers that this is one area that limits individuals' ability to be fully employed and independent. What would you be activating for if you could expand on the ADA?
You want me to start with that one, or one of my colleagues? Pardon?
Feel free to start with whoever's ready. No rush.
Oh,
So go ahead, David.
I'll be short. I mean, I'll be brief. I would zero in on the assurance of access to health care and long-term care. We've been messing around with, and the effort that was started by President Obama to do something about expanding and improving the quality of healthcare with an improved healthcare system for too long. And so I would start with something like healthcare and long-term care services. And I would also be careful to especially deal with what now called the social determinants of health. And in Minnesota, we don't have to make the case anymore for race and economics as a really serious problem. It isn't as simple as passing a piece of legislation. It's how we think about the role of government. It's how we think about the role that we want our senators and House members to play, and our people at the local level. So I would be focusing not on one specific that is just zeroed in on people with disabilities, but on some of the issues that they have and people with disabilities have in common with a whole lot of other Americans that we have not paid attention to at the national level for the last 20 or 30 years.
Yes. Next.
David, you raise an absolute valid and true point. I mean, I have, and I'm gonna spend some time talking about some policy ideas regarding state agencies and vie to Jim on some of the other stuff. But intersectionality is never talked about hardly. And David, you just brought that up. You can't have that in isolated conversation when you're talking about people with disabilities. It all intersectional and is there, right? We don't just operate in our isolated silos. So thank you for bringing that point up. And the other thing, when you were able to work with Harkin, you guys set your egos outside the door. And I'll never forget back in 2001, when Jim Ramstad used to say that all the time. When it comes to education and health and human services, Hoffman, we got to set our egos outside in the hallway and focus on what's important here. That's missing. That's absolutely missing. But I have to tell you, the person sitting next to you and sitting next to me, Jim Abeler, you're like in the middle. I got Durenberger on the right and I'm on the left. Go figure that one, right? And so,
yeah, do that,
Jim. And David, you know, the thing with Minnesota Senate, once a state senator, you're always a state senator. So you're still State Senator Dave Durenberger. But Abeler and I are on hundreds of bills together in a bipartisan manner. We absolutely live that mission and vision that you established years ago, and that Ramstad still talks about to this day, and you still talk about. And Jim and I are examples of how this can get done. And I'll absolutely go get wonky on that, but I know Abeler will cut me off and say, "Look, Hoffman, you know, you're not funny. Don't try to be funny. Your wife is right." And so, but here's what we did, just to give you an idea on the ADA, the expansion. Bobby Silverstein, who absolutely, David, you know him well. He was the lawyer that was part of the discussion. He actually wrote the ADA for Tom and Dave, and he also wrote the Early Intervention Services Act of 1986. But we engaged with him early on to look at our Connect 700 program in Minnesota, and I'll go a little bit more deeper into that. But he established that when it was set up, the metrics were right in it. It's just the management side of it was wrong, right? The management side was not wrong, but it was just not well managed out, right? Governor Dayton did an absolute wonderful job with that thing, and then it just kind of just fell on the wayside. And here's why. Jim and I have established there are 8 policy ideas specifically around disability employment within the state of Minnesota that, if pre-COVID, we were working on. We had hundreds of hours of conversations. Bobby Silverstein was deeply involved. We have thousands of emails that we went through. But I'll just give you the brief highlight, David and Jim and Avery, is those policy ideas is that we need to have ADA coordinators underneath the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, period. There needs to be some congruency and some a systems approach to this, right? There needs to be the creation of a disability rights, equity, and inclusion executive officer. We need to be able to train our human resources and supervisors on not on how to work with people with disability, but how to best utilize the Connect 700 program, right? Training on accommodations. And David, with the DD Act that you did back then, and what we know is reasonable accommodations are just that. They're reasonable accommodations, right? Number 4, we talk about supporting and consulting with agencies on their questions, but if it's running through a singular person, you're going to have some consistency on how that message is set apart. There needs to be an arbitration person when it comes to disability disputes because there's an inconsistent response from state agencies regarding that. There needs to be a proper evaluation of those jobs, the ADA coordinators. When you look at the definitions within agencies, they're absolutely one separate from the other one. There's no consistency on how those jobs, right? And then finally, you know, defining and resetting the limitations on the word undue burden. And I know why you guys put that into existence back in 1989. But undue burden or undue hardship repeatedly when it comes to denied accommodations, we have come across, and Abeler and my office and his office did this, we came across hundreds of points where undue hardship upon an agency was particularly a common save for extreme situations, though they do exist. But there's a set aside for many financial accommodations on that. So there needs to be a clear definition of what then they would need to ensure that employees are informed of the laws and policies. That is what we were trying to work on and what we're going to continue to work on in a bipartisan manner. So I'll get wordy into this, but I'm not going to because I already see Abeler laughing. But David, what you started, you're looking at two people, a Republican and a Democrat, that are trying to live with what exactly you started back in the 80s.
Yeah, we are definitely going to talk about the Connect 700 program a little later, but Senator Abeler, if you would like to continue.
Oh, absolutely. And so thanks, Dave. He's been a mentor to me over the years about how to deport myself and how to work together with folks. And I think he's just been really good at that. And in his 80s, he continues to lead in many ways and to inspire me. So thank you for that. And if Tom Harkin is the father of the ADA, then Senator Hoffman is the son of the ADA. He has immersed himself in the policy and the work of it, serving in Washington, and now as my virtual co-chair in the Senate, where I'm privileged to serve as the chair. And John and I have been really collaborators. And to get something done, you actually have to have a partner like that. And so I'm kind of the philosopher, and John kind of is the wonk. And those taking master's level or doctor levels courses, John would be happy to come back and fill up a few hours with his thoughts, and you could write a great paper out of that. But he's just brilliant on the content, as you could kind of get a hint there. But back to the question of PCAs, which I'm trying to help you stay on topic here. So the challenge, we have many things to talk about. But the challenge I see is, how do you make a PCA a career that people actually can afford to do? What I've seen, and all the people that are on this that are PCAs, is they love their work. It is one of the worst jobs you could ever want in terms of the content of the work. I mean, you're right there. You're living with the person in a very intimate way in many cases. But the PCAs I've met, just almost in totality, really like it. And they love their clients, one or more. They love the service, but they just can't afford it. And they hang on as long as they can, working sometimes 2 jobs. And so we have to find a way to make what they do a respected career. And $13 an hour is not a lot of a career. And we've been trying to get them $2 during COVID, kind of as sort of hazard pay, or just please keep going to work pay. And that's been quite challenging. And so when you have to slog through, money issues and some indifference from the chief executive, where this is not one of their priorities, then it's really hard. And it's been in a few proposals. We'll talk more about some other things we've been trying to do to rescue some of the day service places. I'm sure that'll come up. Mm-hmm. But it takes a real partnership from the top on down. And so John and I are working at the mid-level, trying to reflect the needs of the community and trying to push it up. And it's a challenge. But I remain, and John will tell you this too, that I forever talk about good intents. And I think everybody along the way has good intents. And so somehow they just have to move from their distractions and just the indifference of, well, we have other things to worry about, to focusing on these needs. These are core needs of really important people. And in the Hubert Humphrey's quote about how do you take care of people that have the least to give back to you, I paraphrased it. Actually, they give back a lot. And so, but John and I and Dave and Senator Klobuchar and all the rest would tell you that they care a lot about it. And so, how do you turn that caring into a product? So, thanks for asking.
Of course, and that's actually the perfect segue into our next question. So I really appreciate that, Senator. In Minnesota, there is a shortage of PCA workers, and during COVID-19, it's gotten worse. I personally work as an SSP for deafblind services with a limit of 20 hours a month for my client. So I know that it's hard to be able to, make that a career, and especially with, pay and hours. It's just a challenging situation. I know it's also hard to recruit people to work in this field because wages are low, and especially during COVID, there's not appropriate PPE for workers to feel safe and for their clients to feel safe. Can you tell us what you all are doing to help improve PCA services for Minnesotans with disabilities?
Go ahead, John.
So March 24th, there was a note from the Centers for Medicaid Services, and they said, you know, states that are experiencing some problems within the waiver programs, right? We're going to offer you some technical assistance, and you know, come to us with your concerns, and perhaps we can talk about a way that you can retain services in the home and community-based services field, right? 35 other states, including the District of Columbia, all sought that technical assistance back in March. And let me tell you why I'm saying this, why I'm starting with March. Minnesota, thank you, Dave Durenberger. For every dollar we put on the kitchen table to be invested in home and community-based services, i.e. that's where PCAs are coming from, home health aides, right? For every dollar we invest on the table, the feds match that buck, right? And so when you hear the president talk about wanting to block grant the states, we're going to lose 1.8 billion. I just don't like that conversation, because that was a sidebar joke to somebody else on this panel. But the fact is, for every dollar you throw on the table, you get another dollar match from the feds. So here's what was saying. The feds said, not only would we help you with the technical assistance, but oh, lo and behold, we're going to give you the ability to use retainer fees, right? Meaning you can use that money to retain those services so they're not lost. And they did it on a 30-day fact. Well, you take 30 days, you take a day off, you apply again, and they were giving it back to states. All these states did it, including the District of Columbia, without a problem, right? And it was a one-pager when it came down to it. You talk about the lack of paperwork. Well, they did this because they were doing that. Why the heck didn't Minnesota respond to that request? Why the heck didn't they do that? Because I'm telling you, if that would have been the case back in March, we would have had some protections in place right now that would have provided supports to those home and community-based services providers. Because if we're not going to do that, then I'm sorry, we're going to have no infrastructure for going forward, which opens up a whole different can of beans on that one. So I guess my statement is more of a question. Why would 35 other states, including the District of Columbia, seek assistance from the Centers for Medicaid Services and get retainer fees for home and community-based services, right? And that's a broad spectrum of home and community-based services, but that would definitely affect those PCA providers as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Senator Durenberger, do you have anything to add?
No, just compliments to how well represented we are in the state of Minnesota by both these gentlemen.
Yeah, Senator Abeler, I know that you've already kind of touched on it. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, sure. And, you know, if there's a term that unites us, I think, I don't know all the participants or how many are on, but I think that we all could agree that we're frustrated with how things could be better. And there's a ton of money in the system, a lot of money. You know, in our niche, we spend, I forget the numbers, but it's like 10 billion in just the disability side in a biennium at least. And it's growing, but at the end, no one thinks that they're getting all that they could use. And so maybe we'll talk some more about the challenges facing the day services. We can come back to that. But I want to first off commend a strong start. And Senator Hoffman is correct about some of the frustrations that we have, and those are ongoing, and those are top of mind, and we'll get into that. But so Senator Hoffman and I, actually, as this COVID thing unfolded, we drafted a bill known as Senate File 1200, which gave the commissioner the authority to suspend many of the laws in a whole list of chapters related to home community-based services, and a whole, must have been 10 chapters. And we couldn't get that to become law across in their usual way, but the governor did an executive order, 20-12, as I recollect, where he gave the commissioner authority to suspend things. And you can argue if that's constitutional or not, but we're glad that he did that. So the commissioner has created 80 or so, I think more than 80 now, different exceptions to try to make it work. And, you know, so there was a lot of good intent from the department as they dug in and on the speed of, way faster than the usual speed of bureaucracy, pushed a lot of things through. And so the successes we're enjoying are because of that. They were slow to ramp up in some cases. In some cases, they didn't get enough money into the system, and that's what Senator Hoffman and I are just so worried about, part of the imminent collapse of some of those service providers. But there was a good effort to make it work. And so I think that as Senator Durenberger points out the good side, I want to make sure we offer the commendation for their quick work and the collaboration. We also wrote into that in that order. They actually just pretty much followed the law that John and I wrote, where the commissioner had to collaborate with all 4 chairs, the 2 House chairs, 2 Senate chairs. And if 2 would disagree, that variance would be waived. And so it created a real good dialogue compared to some other departments. The Department of Health has been much more aloof in telling people what they're doing, and they have flexibility as well, but they didn't have that piece where there was a requirement to work together. And I think the best remedy for the frustration is everybody working together, finding a way to serve the people with the special needs in the best we can. How do we help the client, the people? They're not just clients, they're people. How do we help these people have an amazing life and make it work? And so on our good days, you see a lot of that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I feel like personally I'm learning a lot too. I'm just kind of enraptured. So our last question we're gonna head on to, and then we're gonna go to our Q&A just so everyone kind of knows what's going on. So our last question does touch on something that Senator Hoffman brought up a little earlier, which is the Connect 700 program. As you all know, the Connect 700 program was designed to increase the number of people with disabilities in state government, but the program has not met the expectations of the disability community. Are you currently working on legislative reforms? And if so, what are some of the areas of reform you would like to see proposed in legislation?
Well, John, let me go first and then you can fill in all the detail. So you need a philosopher and you need a wonk. And so we're like the odd couple. I'm not sure which one I would be. But anyway, so
David.
If people, my wife says no one knows who you're talking about. Anyway, for the students, it's an old sitcom. It was pretty funny back then. Anyway, but so the goal is to try to give people with a special challenge a chance to try out state employment. And because we need good state employees. And a lot of the jobs we have there are predictable. There's the regular hours, they can get transportation. And they're well within the scope of the capabilities of many of these individuals who are otherwise going to languish, you know, in a group home or something, and which is just so horrible. And so if we can get them moving as independent living, and we did a breakthrough this year, so we'll get back to that, but I'd like to mention that for folks, is we did something remarkable this year. But anyway, so, and it turns out that the accommodations that these individuals need are often very slight. But MMB runs it, and their job is to do budgeting, and they don't really understand the challenge of this, and they're well intended, but this isn't what they do. It's like going to a gas station to buy a dinner. Well, they have, like, you know, dried out sandwiches. We don't have like a turkey dinner you can buy. And so it kind of functions, but it doesn't. But John's idea about the human rights folks having a chance. And so John will get much more in detail, and he's got a couple of juicy stories about accommodations that didn't happen. But to his credit, the governor, did he raise his right hand, John? But he said at a press conference that he's going to help us sort this out to make it better. And so I absolutely want to hold him to his word there. And because it's not a statutory program, I believe it's an executive order program. And so if we have to put it in statute, we should. But with that alternative, the opportunities are so phenomenal and the implementation is so mediocre, you would just come to tears. So anyway, John, it's all yours.
Thank you. And you know, it's amazing, Jim, that's exactly right. The governor at a press conference, he saw me, and you and I had started addressing the Connect 700, and that's how we got connected to Dave Durenberger's friend Bobby Silverstein, who wrote the language that Dave and Tom did, right? And Bobby Silverstein did an evaluation of the Connect 700 program under the Dayton administration, and there were seven points within that he was studying to see if the state became like a lead state, you know, a state that should be recognized. And the way the program was established under the administrations, when it became an executive order, was absolutely hit all those benchmarks that Bobby Silverstein, who still does a lot of consulting on the federal side of this, and he connected with us because he saw a story of the work that Jim and I were doing. And then what we got from the governor was absolutely, let's fix this, right? And this was pre-COVID, you guys. I mean, it was, you know, and we were making arrangements to have Dave Durenberger, your friend Bobby Silverstein, was going to come to Minnesota and help us sort through the management side of this. And based upon that work with Senator Abeler's office, my office, and with Bobby Silverstein, is where we came up with these 7 key connects. Well, you want to do an 8th one, which is there are several pieces in discussion that come up to strengthen the Connect 700. But those conversations all started before COVID hit this state. And once COVID hit, it's almost like that got set aside. But it's not stopping where we want to go. And Avery, to your point, you know, there was a couple of news articles that were done on it. People we educated, our staff, Jim and I, our staff educated the folks on just what they were finding. And it's amazing. I'll give you an example. You want to get wonky. There was one agency that had 600 requests for reasonable accommodations under Connect 700, 600, and granted 599 of them, right? Wow. They figured it out. They figured it out because that agency gave this person who was their lead in this absolute total control on how to educate people on what the system needs to be there, right? I can only say that for one agency. Other agencies, I'll give you a prime example since Jim brought it up. One employee who lives with autism and is easily distracted. She's smart, articulate, one of these, you know, knows more about computer stuff, forgets more in a day than any of us will ever know, right? There was a workshop that they were going to, and she asked for this. And David Durenberger, tell me if this is a reasonable accommodation. I would like to sit in the front row, right in front of the speaker, and have my laptop there and pull up the worksheet so I can follow along and stay focused on that. Would you consider that reasonable accommodation?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the department that we found out said no. It's too distracting to the other employees, and they might think you're going to be on Facebook. Honest to God, that's the response that was there. So there's this inconsistency on what is a reasonable accommodation, right? I don't think you set up the law back in the 80s to make it an unreasonable accommodation. But with that comes to our discussion, Avery, about under Connect 700, there needs to be a little bit more consistency, and there needs to be an agency that oversees that piece. Not like Jim said, MMB, which is, you know, they're budget people. They're not necessarily human rights people, right? And we are talking about a human right here. We're talking about a constitutional civil right here. So I think that bodes well to that piece right there. And I'd be more than happy to share. I know time is of the issue here, but you know, when I talked about creating a disability rights, equity, and inclusion executive officer, one state did that, actually, the state of Maryland a few years ago. Any conversation that they had regarding any policy, they had somebody on the cabinet that was all disability stuff. When it was the state of Maryland, and for the life of me, I can't remember the governor's name at the time, but that was the only state at the time that had somebody that dealt with disability on the cabinet level specifically. So if you're talking transportation, public policy, Department of Human Services, Department of Health, they made sure that there was an intersectionality of the conversation to disability in the conversation. So something like that would be an easy fix. But we have, you know, the 7 points that I talked about. We have those. We want to get back to work so we can get this. So let's get rid of COVID so we can get to work on this.
Amen. Seriously, that's awesome. Senator Durenberger, do you have anything to add?
No, this for me is a marvelous experience. I mean, I can pick up the newspaper in the morning, or I can watch the local, you know, what passes for local news these days, and I can never learn as much about how to get things done in Minnesota as I've learned from John and Jim already today. And we're all so fortunate that these two people are there, that they're the ones who have made the decision to be helpful to the disability community, because nobody else, including the governor, could get it done like those two can. Or they couldn't present it in a way that was so logical that you'd have to act on it.
That's pretty
Let me just say one thing else, if I can, Avery, just a short thing to follow up. And John was just really eloquent with his comments. And we had a hearing about this, and just in summary, we think this should be a freeway, an easy way for a person who just wants to give it a shot. Does it work? But instead it's an obstacle course. And so I'm pleased for the commitment of the administration to work with this. And then I presume the House will be happy to as well, and the advocates. And so, as Dave will tell you, and as he's watched us, the only time things get done is when you have a partnership between the three branches of government, executive branch, House, Senate. The advocates work with it, and you take some time, you have hearings and sort through things. Maybe I'll just make one more comment about the thing I wanted to bring up, because it's a cool thing. If you remember back, well, none of us remember before 1900, but I think people with disabilities just kind of wandered around and didn't have a very good life at all. And then they set up these asylums. I'm looking across the river from my house at the Anoka State Hospital, which was called an asylum at the time, and they did terrible. I mean, it was science, but it was horrible science. That was supposed to be a good thing, and it was terrible. And then they moved into state institutions that were a little more humane, and then finally into group homes. And so the default setting has been, you have someone with a disability, you're going to a group home. You're going to go to a day service brick and mortar site, and we've been working toward more independent, but they have to be pulled out of there. So Senator Hoffman and I, and the ARC and a good number of other people in the department helped us. We've redefined it in Minnesota. The default as of August 1st, it went into effect. The default setting is you have a special need, you're 19 years old, you're going to be diverted to a community living site if it can work. And if it doesn't work, then you can go live in a group home. But the default setting is you're not going to be in a group home. The default setting is you're not going to go to a DTNH, although we need to keep those open, and I'm sure we'll bring that up yet. Because some people, that's really their best choice. You need enough of those to go around, but supported employment in the community and all these self-directed plans where people have the best chance, and actually helping the parents sometimes of these young adults to say, no, let's let Bill give it a shot. We think he can have this job, and he seems to like it there, and he's got a really good employer, and anyway, so there's some really amazing employers out there. So as of August 1st, the default setting is you're not going to be driven into these these 4-unit places, and not going to be driven into a day service. And look, in the next 5 years, this will be the biggest single change, I think, in the disability service world of anything. And we started in January, John and I, with a Vision for Independence, working with everybody, and it's law, and it's not going to change for a long time. So how about that, Dave? Huh? Thanks.
To David's point, David, I'm glad you said that. That's how we did our job. We actually worked together, right? And part of that is you didn't personalize anything. I mean, you kept personalities out of this conversation, and so there you go, David. We're trying to
let us know how it goes. Doctors, their families. Thanks, David.
All right, so we have going to our Q&A now. So these are all questions from our audience right now. So this one's a direct follow-up to the one I just asked, so that's the one I'm going to ask first. It is from Steve Anderson. It says, thank you to all of you on the panel for your past, present, and future support. On the issue of PCAs, do folks understand that making PCAs a livable career choice is a lot cheaper than going back to the days of housing people with disabilities in institution? Collaboration is key.
Yes.
Yes. David, yes? You got a yes on that, David?
You guys are right.
So let me just explain the problem with that. So if these individuals aren't served well, they're going to wind up somewhere. We don't usually get credit for the ill effect of winding up somewhere. We just pay for it. And if I want to, PCA's pay could easily be doubled, and it wouldn't be unreasonable to give them $20-something an hour and benefits. That would be nice. And then they could actually do this. And that would probably save money. But we live on a 2-year budget cycle, maybe a 4-year frame. And the budget folks have a hard time calculating secondary effects. And in fact, they usually disregard them. So he's right, keep pushing. John and I are trying, and Dave is cheering for us, and so is the audience. So wish us well.
So there needs to be a little piece to that. David, you brought up Dr. Colleen Wick, right? And it wasn't that long ago where she came in she was a psychologist, right? And she's like, these, folks are not living the best life in these state institutions. And, the history, you've been part of that. Your wife wrote this wonderful book about the history of that. But here's the thing, Jim's correct. Everybody focuses on a 2-year thing. I think a lot of people miss the understanding of where we were once in this state, right? And the ADA came out of how progressive Minnesota was, setting politics aside. When you look at the history of the ADA, I believe David made the comment in '89 and again in '90. I mean, every time he's talked about it, it really had its roots started in what Minnesota was doing years ago. That ain't the same anymore. And I think there's a missing piece here for students, advocates, teachers. People need to be re-educating those folks that are in public policy, and not just legislators, but those that are working in the rank and file, just about, let's not forget about our past, and let's make sure we don't, replicate that, because I think people forget about that. They absolutely forget about it. It's not front and center in their conversation. So I can't forget about it.
Yeah, definitely.
If I may, can I add to that?
Of course.
When I left the Senate, and my former staffer, driver by the name of Tim Pawlenty got elected governor of Minnesota, I persuaded him to appoint a commission on the future of healthcare. And just, it could be as broad as you wanted it to be. And so we sat down together and decided who should be on it. And one of the people that I wanted on it, he hadn't yet gotten to know, it was Colleen Wick. And so during the course of our discussion, it was an amazing group of 20 people. And we did this work in like about 4 or 5 months. We covered every base. For me, it was just incredible, even after having come off the Senate and all the rest of that corny stuff. But one of the things she did in the course of our study and thought about what happens when we give the governor a whole bunch of recommendations. What's the likelihood that these things are going to be implemented. And so she spent a few bucks getting an expert to build the case for, or make the case, if you will, for the logic of what's going on in the political realm. And the expert that was hired traced the evolution that now we think we're kind of suffering from, at least at the national level and to some degree the state level on occasion, in which people have lost track, except for these two gentlemen, people have lost track of why they get elected. They think it's all about being in office, or they think about the money that's involved and all. But she had us invest in what's the challenge you're going to face after you get all these great recommendations of yours out there. And I thought, I didn't ask her to do it. She did this strictly on her own. But it tells you how fortunate we are, all three of us and thousands of others in Minnesota, to have a person like that who has made a lifelong commitment to the cause that we're talking about today.
Yeah. Wow, that was just awesome from all of you guys. Thank you so much. We've talked a little bit about independence during that last question of independence of people with disabilities. I actually found another question here in our Q&A that kind of connects independence with the upcoming election, with polling places and people with disabilities going to polling places. So here's the question from Vivian Fowler. Many of the polling places remain inaccessible to Black, Latino, and disabled American voters. We have a US president who likes to cheat and attempts to make it as difficult as possible for people to vote. What can Congress do to increase access to democratic institutions and fair voting practices for people with disabilities? I have one more question that kind of connects to that. It is from Hannah. She starts with, "My name is Hannah. I am deaf-blind. I was wondering about accessible voting during COVID. I want to vote, but I am immunocompromised. I would also want to vote independently."
Well, you want to go first, John, or what do you like?
Yeah, I think this speaks highly of our conversation about the fact that we don't have consistency, or we don't have some uniformity in people that understand what the intent of Durenberger And Harkin's bill, which is law, has been law since 89, right? 1991, I think it was it signed. Justin Dart, anyway, I don't know that, but that also bodes, there's information that needs to be out there. I believe the Secretary of State's office is absolutely addressing that. Steve Simon has done a great job, and there needs to be some flexibility. Again, if you had somebody who understood what a reasonable accommodation is, for Hannah, it might be, somebody drives her up to the pole, right? They can come out and go through it's curbside service, right? Something to me that just begs of a reasonable accommodation, something like that. So, but this goes back to me saying we need a center point of information person that understands disability and reasonable accommodations in this state, and we're missing that. But there's the but clause. Steve Simon, I believe, is the proper choice in addressing that because it is a Secretary of State's issue. So, and the voting rights, that was a bill that was passed, right? I think, matter of fact, Durenberger, that was one of yours, was the accessible barrier-free voting for people. I mean, that's something that should be a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
So, in Minnesota, I think people are fortunate. I cannot speak for any other state. And in the states, a lot of voting, to the questioner, is actually a state-run operation. Minnesota's voting laws are different than Iowa's, are different than California's. And Minnesota actually has a very generous vote at home program. It's called No Excuse Absentee Voting. I don't know if you can still sign up for it yet for this primary coming up. But you can easily vote from your home. And I think voting is such an important thing. I think it's okay if people have to take at least a small effort to do that. But if a person simply calls up to your local government center in the county and say, I would like to vote from my house, they will send you out at their expense a request for a ballot. You then send that in. You can be on the permanent list. And then when every election comes up, they will mail a ballot out to you that you can then vote in the comfort of your own home and not have to go anywhere, and at your leisure ask who you want, who they think would be a good choice. And then you mail it in so it arrives timely and you voted. There was a time when in Minnesota has same-day registration. And if you don't have ID, you can be vouched for if you actually go to the place. But the time when you actually have to go is past. And that was changed when was the no excuse absentee changed? It was 4 years ago or something, not a long time ago. But I think to accommodate what John was suggesting, I think Minnesota is there simply you request that a caregiver could call and then you have to sign your own name on something, but I think it's pretty squared away. And so voting is very important. And I think that the individuals, as you go to vote, would do well to explore the different candidates and listen to the forums. And I think we've come a long ways in that, certainly compared to what it was, back when we had those asylums and all that, when it was virtually impossible. So thanks.
Senator Durenberger, do you have anything to add?
Oh, just to compliment Jim on his statements about Minnesota, which, make us unique and make us a special place to live.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so we're gonna go with potentially one more question. We have about 8 minutes left. So this one is from an anonymous attendee, and it's about assistive technology. Assistive technology, text-to-speech software, speech-to-text, etc., is becoming ubiquitous. These resources are available on our cell phones, in software programs, yet most students in Minnesota with documented print disabilities have limited, if any, knowledge of these resources. Can we get funding to ensure that access to these resources is made available to students and that professional development is available to teachers and administrators?
Go ahead, John.
That would fall, to me, that would definitely fall on. Okay, two things. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, right? Passed in 1973. David, did you have something to do with that one too? Was that, you seem to have your fingers on everything that was that you can't discriminate, right? I mean, that's the basic premise of the Rehab Act, right? And in this case, If I'm not getting if I'm not getting equal access to something that somebody else would have equal access to, then one would question whether or not that's being, honest or reasonable in this case, right? And so I would think that the same application, 504, it goes into the college system. But here again, the Minnesota State system, let's assume it's Minnesota State system, right? They don't have consistency campus to campus on Section 504 of the Rehab Act, right? And again, it would fall in line with our current argument of Connect 700 or Connect on the fact of ADA coordinators within agencies. The same lies in here as well, right? One campus is going to see different than another campus. And I can share that with you not only anecdotally, but also the fact of the people that we've talked to that have experienced some of those issues on college campuses. So why? The question would help me understand why this would not be any different than assuring some kind of compliance under Section 504 of the Rehab Act, right? That would be my first question.
Yeah.
And I'll just comment real briefly. The print disability piece is, at least in my observation, kind of a newer discovery compared to people that have difficulty hearing or seeing or have some clear challenge. But I think it's coming. And I think that pressure from all the participants on the various levels of government to make sure that they're complying as best they can, and then getting rid of the as best they can part will help a lot. So there's a long ways to go, but we've come a long ways. But always better, the next generation after John and I leave, when we're have done our time, we'll have to continue this. There'll be discussions 30 years from now about how do we help this thing, this person, and not this thing, but how do we help this challenge that's facing somebody? And it's endless, but it's really important. And if you're going to walk from here to Florida, you'd better get started. And so maybe we're to Illinois or Tennessee or somewhere, but we still have a ways to go. And anyway, thanks.
I'll add one comment to that. I think we got a couple of minutes left, but the work that didn't get done on the Affordable Care Act is critical. It didn't get done because the Republican leader of the Senate said there's going to make Obama a one-term president, and everything came to a halt. So now we face another choice as this election comes up. You either vote for somebody who promises to abolish it, or you vote for somebody who said we're going to build on it or something like that, but lacks specifics. Unfortunately, all the related issues on healthcare are not just about hospitals and drugs and things like that. A big part of it in the recent years has become the social determinants of health. And conversations around the obvious, such as race and economics, are real, but the same applies to people with a variety of disabilities. There is a desperate need for this country to understand that while we're all created equal, some of us have to work a little bit harder than others to get that equality. But we shouldn't have to when it comes to access to public health and or health and medical services that we need right now. And so this whole business of the social determinants of health, as it's being called right now, has become an important issue to those of us who have to make a decision about who the next president or the next US senators or the next congressman should be. Expanding on the Affordable Care Act to include this sort of thing, includes all the people that are listening to this program.
Yeah, I believe that's very well said. Well, we're going to start wrapping up now. Thank you all so much for all of your words of wisdom. I enjoyed being here and being a facilitator. I feel like I learned so much. Hopefully everyone who attended also feels like they learned a lot. I just want to add that tomorrow we're doing our happy hour event for the Ability event at 4:30 with Galen Lee. So if everyone would like to come join us for that, you are more than welcome. But one last thank you to Senator John Hoffman, Senator Jim Abeler, and Senator David Durenberger. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks a lot. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.